Right now you're listening to me through the PodMic USB running into the Rodecaster Duo, and I have no effects and no processing. Obviously I'm running it as an XLR mic, not a USB mic, but we will be using it as USB later on when we do some comparisons and stuff, so we'll hear both types of ways of using the microphone. But right now it's a dry signal, and that's going to be the case for all the other mics that we compare in this video. We're not doing any effects or any processing. I also need to let you know that Rode did send me the PodMic USB for free, but I'm under absolutely no obligation to make a video about it. I made an entire separate video about how I handle free products and sponsorships and that whole deal, so definitely check that out if you have any questions about that. Now let's talk about the performance of the PodMic USB and the original PodMic. Like I mentioned, I'm not using any effects or processing, but if I go into the Rodecaster Duo right here, there is a PodMic preset. So if you are running the PodMic USB into any of the second gen Rodecasters or as a USB mic into your computer, you do have that option to select a PodMic preset. And just so you know what that sounds like, again, this right now is with no effects and no processing. And if I can find it on this menu, this is what it sounds like with the default PodMic preset turned on in the Rodecaster Duo. I think this actually sounds pretty decent. I mean, it's a Rode product running into a Rode product, so they know what to do not to erode the sound quality. But I did make a preset that I like that's a little bit different. So this is the default preset, and this is my preset, which I didn't change too much. I just turned down some of the highs and boosted some of the lows, basically. Kind of played with that a little bit of that EQ, which is how I've been using it throughout the time that I've had it on a bunch of streams and podcasts. And I've been really trying to spend a lot of hours with this microphone since I have so many hours with the original. I want to get to know this. I wanted to get to know it before making a video about it because I wanted to have a solid opinion and experience with it. But for the sake of a fair comparison, let's go back to no effects and no processing. So this is with my PodMic preset, and this is with no effects and no processing. I do have 52 decibels of gain. Some other interfaces like the Focusrite Scarlett's only have about 56 decibels of gain. So that means I would be maxing this out, and this is as much gain as I could possibly get. So sometimes, since this is a dynamic microphone, if you're using it via XLR into a mixer or interface that doesn't have a ton of clean gain, you might need a booster like a Fethead to get the signal that you want. But if you're running it into any of the newer types of interfaces, like any of the new Rodecasters or the Vocaster or the Mixcast, all of those casts, the DLZ, the Mackie, the Boss Gig casts, all those very similar sounding products, most of them have at least like 76 or 70 decibels of gain, which would be more than enough to run this mic. Now, physically, the differences between the PodMic USB and the original PodMic are pretty subtle. Size-wise, they are exactly the same. They're the exact same dimensions. The difference is the color. The original has like the silver grill. The PodMic USB has all black, which I think actually looks pretty awesome, but I also think the original PodMic looks pretty awesome. And then the other place that you're going to notice all the differences is on the back of the microphone, because that's where you have all of the USB controls. You've got your headphone output, your USB-C connector, you have a dial to control the volume to your headphones, and you have a small LED that lets you know when the mic is active via USB. I don't know if this is something that could change in the future or if it's something that's even necessary, but as of right now, you can't use it as both at the same time, USB and XLR. It's one or the other. So that's why I only have it as XLR right now. They both have the exact same yoke, the exact same mount, which is really cool because the PodMic's mount is incredibly versatile. The PodMic has always been one of my favorite physically designed microphones. It's just so practical and it's built really well. It could definitely be a bit of a weapon, but the yoke also has a 5/8 and 3/8 inch mount built right into it. So that means for most mic stands and most boom arms, you don't need any adapters or anything. You can just use the microphone as is. Now, one thing I can't wait to share with you is that there is a slight difference in weight, which was kind of weird. So the original PodMic weighs 917 grams. The new PodMic USB weighs 865 grams. So it is slightly lighter than the original, although it's not really perceptible. It is kind of weird though, because that same thing happened with the NT1 5th generation, where it was substantially lighter than the previous NT1, even though it added USB functionality. So I don't know why. I don't know if that means anything. It still feels like a very solid, durable, well-made microphone. Let's talk about the original. Let's do some sound comparisons. So this whole time so far, you've been hearing me on the PodMic USB, again, no effects and no processing. And now you're listening to me on the original PodMic, again, with no effects and no processing. Now for me, the PodMic was my first dedicated, podcasting, broadcasting style microphone. So when I went from having nothing to having the PodMic, I was just so blown away with it. It's just for $99, it's an amazing microphone, and I still really like it, especially running into a Rodecaster. It's great. But I got this when it was released a number of years ago, and over time, I don't know, my ears or my taste just started to change, and I started to dislike the way that the PodMic sounds on my voice. I think that it sounds very thin, it sounds very tinny, it sounds kind of harsh, and what I really noticed is that over long periods of time, it became difficult to listen to. So for a couple of minutes or something, it was fine, but for an hour or a 90-minute podcast or a 2-hour live stream, it started to get kind of fatiguing and sort of hurting my ears a little bit. Now, it's very important to note there that every voice sounds different on every microphone. So while I will be doing a few comparisons with the PodMic USB in this video, I do have an entirely separate video that is almost an hour long where my wife and I compare the PodMic USB to 25 different microphones. You can hear my voice, you can hear her voice, you have a male and a female voice on all of these different mics. PodMic is definitely one that as time went on, I stopped liking the way that my voice sounds with it. Now, what I learned was that the PodMic, I think, really is a mic that's made to be EQ'd. I'm not using any effects or any processing, but if I go into the Rode PodMic setting and turn that on, now this is what that sounds like, and they did kind of tame some of that harshness, although this to me still sounds a little too like, I don't know if it's too processed or if the noise gate is too intense or something right here. But what I would do here is probably go in and then add in some bass, because I really feel like the PodMic lacks a lot of low end. And we go to the equalizer, and then what I would do is go to the highs and sort of turn down the highs, because normally the PodMic kind of has like this shrill feel to it, but I like to turn that down a little bit. And now that sort of has been tamed. It's almost maybe too bassy at this point. But again, if we turn all of that off and we just go back to the generic, what it's going to sound like when you plug it into any interface, this is what that would sound like. And to me, it's not the best sounding microphone. It's at a great price, $99. It's built really well. What I just learned after having the PodMic for a long time was that it's definitely something you should expect to EQ. Now, Rode with the PodMic USB said that it has the same classic PodMic sound, but I do think that they sound a little bit different. So according to the marketing materials, it's the same, but I do think there's a slight difference in the PodMic USB. So again, this is the regular original PodMic, $99, no effects and no processing. And this is the PodMic USB, $199 with no effects and no processing. It feels like it's still a little harsh, a little bit goes towards the high end, but compared to this one over here, it does sound to me a little more full, a little more rich, and especially the low end sounds better, and the high end to me sounds a lot less harsh. So again, original PodMic and PodMic USB, both as XLR mics with no effects and no processing. Now, when they said processing, you probably heard that plosive. Now, just like with any microphone, if you have the mic at a 45-degree angle from your mouth, you're going to then not be breathing directly into it, and that's going to help a lot. But with the original PodMic, even though I love the style of it, using a windscreen kind of became a necessity. So this really helps to tame plosives. It completely kills the physical style of the microphone, which I like the way microphones look. And it's a bummer when you have this really cool mic that suddenly now just sort of looks like you're talking into a dog toy or something. But the windscreen also does, just by itself, act as a bit of an equalizer to tame some of those harsh sounds. So going back over here to the original PodMic, this is its, propensity for plosives. This is the $20 WS2 windscreen from Rode. Pop that on there. Now, this really did help tame some of those plosives. Peter Piper pitched a podcast, and it did sort of take down some of those really harsh high ends to help the microphone sound a little better without me having to dial in any EQ in the Rodecaster or anything. Now, fortunately, ReporterStore.com, where I get a lot of my colored windscreens, did start making PodMic specific ones that I think look a little bit better. It's going to do the same thing and tame some of those high ends, handle some of those plosive problems, but you also then get to choose all these cool colors and you can kind of customize it. So when it comes to windscreens, I think this looked the best for the original PodMic. Now, going back here to the PodMic USB, it does come with a windscreen. So even though there's still the same built-in one, it comes with this really kind of cool windscreen that is plastic and mesh, but it sort of keeps the PodMic's style. It does increase the size of the mic. But anyway, Peter Piper pitched a podcast. And now if I pop that on there, Peter Piper pitched a podcast, you can hear that it did change the sound of the microphone, but I do think in both cases it changes the sound for the better. This is a really, really nice pop filter, especially when you look at the options we had before. And unfortunately, At least at the time I'm recording this, this is not available separately, which is a bummer because it does fit on the original PodMic as well, and it's a great way to handle those plosive problems, make the mic sound a little bit better, and still keep some of the visual style of the microphone without totally just, eliminating the nice looks and the nice design of the microphone. So even though I prefer the look of the PodMic USB without the windscreen on it, since it is so effective and it comes with it, I've been using it most of the time with it because then I really don't have to worry about plosives. So now that we know the basics of the PodMic USB and how it compares to the original PodMic and some of the functionality, we need to dive into that USB functionality. So let's switch over from XLR to USB. There should not be any change in sound. So right now you're listening to me on the PodMic USB running into the Rodecaster Duo via XLR. And now you're listening to me on the PodMic USB running directly into Adobe Audition via USB with no effects and no processing. This is what this sounds like as a plug-and-play USB microphone. Now when it comes to the USB functionality on this microphone, Rode did kind of everything right, honestly. My biggest complaint, if we go back to my video all about the Rode NT1 5th generation, which has USB functionality, and we'll be checking that out in a second, my biggest complaint here is that while it sounds awesome and works awesome, it does not have any physical USB functionality. There's no headphone output, there's no LED, there's no gain control, nothing. Whereas the PodMic USB has almost everything you would want in a good USB microphone. Unfortunately, my biggest complaint with many of Rode's USB microphones is there is no physical gain control on the microphone, so you have to adjust the gain, the signal you're getting in your software or in the Rode software. But right now, like I mentioned, I'm recording into Adobe Audition. Let's also go into the Rode apps. I'm gonna go into Rode Central right now. We've got the PodMic USB, it pops up right away, and now we can jump in and start playing around. I think you even heard the sound change as soon as I opened this and saw the processing. So we can turn off that processing. We have the same processing here that you would see on the Rodecaster Pros, and as you might have seen with other microphones and other audio gear in Rode Central and stuff, which is super cool because what that means is when you plug the microphone in via USB, now through your computer, you essentially have a virtual Rodecaster. So you don't have to then buy the Rodecaster if this is all you need is the one microphone, or in the case of Rode, you can connect multiple of their USB microphones to Rode Connect and use up to 4 USB microphones at the same time with one computer, which is pretty cool. So it can, in a way, either eliminate the need for something like a Rodecaster or at least delay the need. So if you want to buy the microphone, use it as USB for a while, and then add in another piece of equipment later on, you can totally do that. Just like as you've seen before with other Rode stuff, we have basic processing. So if I turn that on, now you can hear what that sounds like. We have depth, sparkle, and punch. What these are, I don't really know, but this is what it sounds like when I take the depth all the way down. This kind of sounds like that classic PodMic sound. And if I add in a ton of depth, it's sort of adding in like bass. It's almost, I'm kind of wondering if these are low, mids, and highs is what that means. So we'll put that there. Sparkle is just going to, it really does kind of sound like this is actually just the mids. I'm wondering if that's what that is. But a little bit of sparkle. Maybe my voice could use a little bit of sparkle. Punch maybe has an element of compression to it, I'm wondering. So this is with no punch, and then this is me knocking you out with a lot of punch in my voice. Definitely very broadcasty sound. But just these 3 basic things are oftentimes enough to dial in a sound that sounds really good on any of these microphones that work with this software. You can, of course, then click on Advanced, and now we have so many more options. We have a compressor we can turn on. We have noise gate that we can activate, so that way if you're not in an ideally sound-treated environment, like you can kind of hear the noise gate opening and closing. But I think Rode has gotten so much better than the original Rodecaster was, where I could never use the noise gate because it was way too obvious. I think they've done a good job at making the noise gate a lot more subtle and a lot more flexible to adjust to become more subtle. We've got a high pass filter, which I usually like using high pass filters, but with the PodMic, since it's like, hello, where are the low ends? I'm not going to block out any low ends. We've got the exciters. I feel like the RL exciter, this is the one that is almost like emphasizing the high end. So oftentimes I don't like using that with the PodMic, but the big bottom, I like the big bottom, and I cannot lie because it adds a lot more. It fills in some of the blanks that the PodMic is missing. So we can add a little bit of that drive. We can add some of that tune. And now I feel like, at least with my voice, this is sounding a little bit easier to listen to. And what's really neat about this is once I get these settings dialed in, they are saved to the microphone. So what that means is next time I connect it to my computer, I don't need to go through and adjust all these settings to get this sound again, but even more so, if I take this and I plug it into another device or another computer that does not have these applications on it, via USB, it's still going to sound like this. It's going to keep the sound that I have dialed in. It does not affect XLR, so that does not count with XLR. This has no bearing on the XLR signal from the microphone, only USB, but all of these settings are then saved into the mic itself, so that way once you get it dialed in, you kind of never need to open the apps again unless you really want to. You just have the sound that you like, plug it in, and you're ready to go. I have the noise gate off, but I'm gonna leave it on for now just because I lied. I should turn off all the processing so we can begin the process of comparing the PodMic to a few other microphones. So for the sake of making my life easier, I'm gonna switch back to XLR so that way it'll be easier to add other USB microphones into my recording here, and I won't go crazy trying to edit this video. So now I'm still on the Rode PodMic USB, this time running into the Rodecaster Duo via XLR, because now you're listening to me on the Shure MV7, which is probably the most direct competitor that I have to the PodMic USB, although it does have a $50 higher MSRP at $249. It is a USB XLR combo microphone, so they are very different sounding microphones. Right now you can hear me on the MV7, and now you can hear me on the PodMic USB. Totally different sounds, not good, bad, right, or wrong, just totally different, and they might work differently on different voices. But the MV7 is also a dynamic microphone, and my only two gripes with it are that it has micro USB. I've complained about that since the beginning. This microphone came out way after USB-C was a standard. Why you're using micro USB? I had to dig out this weird cable. No, this should be a USB-C microphone. And the other thing is that it is quite susceptible to plosives, especially with the little windscreen that comes with it. If I take that off, it almost just looks like a very unique type of microphone under here. So what I've done pretty much all the time that I've used this microphone is getting reporterstore.com windscreens for the SM7B, popping those on there. They fit all right, and now I have no plosives really at all. Plosive problems perfectly problematically, Reporter Store does make MV7 specific windscreens, but I haven't tried them. And the SM7B ones just work so well at eliminating plosives. They don't look that goofy. It fits fine. Probably, again, in terms of mics that I own, the most direct competitor to the PodMic USB. And now we're moving to a USB-only microphone, which is Rode's NT-USB Plus. I think this makes sense to compare because it's another very popular USB microphone from Rode. If you just want the USB functionality of the PodMic USB, all of that is included here. The same Rode Connect apps, the same processing. You have your headphone output, you have your headphone volume, you have a blue light that's in the microphone itself to let you know when it's on. It comes with this really cool windscreen pop filter right here. And I think that this is a really great sounding microphone, a little bit susceptible to handling noise, but I really love the way that this sounds. Again, the biggest thing missing here is a physical gain knob. Please, USB microphones need physical gain knobs. They just really do. But I love the way that this microphone sounds. And my hope when Rode was announcing a USB version of the PodMic was that it would sound a little more like the NT-USB Plus. Now, I know that might not be a super fair comparison because this is a dynamic microphone, that's a condenser microphone, those work totally differently, but the basic sound profile of being kind of full, rich, I think this does a better job of sounding good on a wider variety of voices. I was really hoping that would be in here, and they kind of went a little bit in that direction, but just not quite far enough because I've used this microphone so many times on so many different things, and for just a USB only mic, it kind of kicks butt. Like, this is just an absolutely awesome microphone, the Rode NT-USB Plus. Now, I think following the NT-USB Plus, it makes sense to check out the Sennheiser Profile, which has been, since its release, my favorite USB microphone because it's just so darn simple. It's kind of the opposite of having all of that functionality in DSP. This is just a USB microphone. You have all of the physical controls, mute, gain, mixing, monitoring, headphone outputs, LEDs, everything just built onto the microphone, and you don't need any software to access anything. And I can even adjust the gain. I can make it really loud right here. I can make it really quiet right here. I can do everything from the microphone itself via USB-C without needing any other software. And then if I want, I can take this into other software and sweeten it up or EQ it if I want, which I'm not doing at all right now. So I think this made sense to look at compared to the NT-USB. And as an example of what kind of functionality, physical functionality, I think every USB microphone should have. Now, in this video, I'm only comparing a handful of microphones to the PodMic USB, the ones I have that I think are the most relevant. But again, I do have that entire almost hour-long comparison where there are 25 microphones that you can hear a male and a female voice on. So if you want to go to the most in-depth PodMic USB comparisons possible, definitely check that out. But again, this microphone right here is the Sennheiser Profile with an MSRP of $129. You also notice it is really good about rejecting handling noise. That's sort of something I didn't expect with this microphone when it was released, and I love that it just does not pick up handling noise. But now we're back over here on the PodMic USB, which is pretty good at rejecting handling noise, but also semi-susceptible. It's not the Profile, it's not the SM7B in terms of rejecting that kind of handling noise. And now you're listening to me through the Rode NT1 5th generation, which is an XLR USB combo mic. I'm using it as an XLR mic because that's easier for me right now, but it has the same quality through USB, and then you have all of the Rode applications. This also has 32-bit float audio built into it, as I mentioned in my whole video about it, so you can do some pretty cool recording with that. But as I also mentioned in my video, and even earlier in this video, this has no other physical USB functionality. So it kind of, that's really frustrating. You have this really nice USB-C connector, and then you cannot connect headphones or gain, or you can't do anything else. Everything else has to be software-based, and you have no good way of monitoring your audio with no latency, which is not great, especially if you want to do something music-related or just hear how things are sounding. It's very important to be able to do what I'm doing right now through the Rodecaster Duo, or like I can do through the PodMic and these other mics via USB, where I can monitor with no latency. And you can't do that, unfortunately, with the NT1 5th generation. But otherwise, I do think this is a really good sounding microphone. It does need a pop filter or windscreen because it is so susceptible to plosives, but I genuinely do just absolutely love the way that this microphone sounds. It's a condenser mic. I think I've learned over the years that I kind of tend to lean towards condensers a little more than dynamic microphones. I just really love the way that they sound. And again, no effects and no processing, just the raw signal out of the microphone. And now you're listening to me on the Rode Procaster, which is, it looks like a really long pod mic, like a really long original pod mic. So the Procaster has an MSRP of $229, which is a little bit higher than some of the other microphones, higher than the PodMic USB. There is no USB functionality, although if you like the way this sounds or looks, the Rode XDM100 is kind of, I don't have one so I can't show you right now, but it's kind of a USB version of the Procaster. So it's almost like you could choose USB or XLR, but you don't have a choice for combo. This is a very big, a very heavy microphone, but it does sound quite different than the PodMic. So again, this is the Rode Procaster, and this is the Rode PodMic USB. They don't sound, especially if I take off this windscreen, they sound pretty similar. So this is the PodMic, and this is the Procaster. You can hear the windscreen made them sound a lot more similar, but without the windscreen, you can hear a lot more of the difference between these two microphones. So this is the Rode Procaster, which I think is a great sounding microphone. It's been around for a while. And this is the PodMic USB. Different sound, but not, you can tell that they're like related. These are clearly related microphones. This is another dynamic microphone, and that's what it sounds like. And the last microphone that I want to compare in this video is, of course, the Shure SM7B. I know it might not make sense. This is a $399 XLR-only microphone. This is a $199 XLR USB combo microphone, but as you heard right there, they have very, very different sounds. The SM7B, of course, being pretty legendary. It, to me, goes in the exact opposite direction of the PodMic in that its sound is so neutral. In a way, it almost sounds kind of muted and dull, and you need to add in the EQ to sort of give it that life and that punch. Whereas the PodMic sounds so like characteristic, you almost need to add an EQ to dull it down, like to make this sound more like this, and then add EQ to make this sound more like that. It's kind of a strange thing, but with these two microphones and knowing how popular they are, let's add in a little bit of EQ. So on the PodMic, if I go back into my presets and I add my PodMic USB preset, so now you're listening to it with the PodMic USB preset, and now we jump over to the SM7B. They actually don't sound all that different. I really like the Rodecaster's SM7B presets, and I think it's cool there's one in these. even though this is not a Rode microphone. So this is with no preset, and now this is with the SM7B preset. I think it does a great job with this microphone. I am running this now at 56 decibels of gain. So on some mixers, some interfaces, this would be the maximum amount of gain, and honestly, my signal's probably still a little bit quiet. So if you're not using a Rodecaster or something with a lot of gain, you probably need a booster with the SM7B, even more so than you would with something like a PodMic. I think it's easier to get away with the PodMic running into a cheap interface without a booster than it is with the SM7B. But of course, the SM7B also has the benefit of being very resistant to handling noise. So it's got some amazing built-in shock rejection. You can hit the desk, all the stuff, and it really doesn't pick up very much at all. It's a mic that really sounds best when you're super close to it, so that can help not pick up environmental sound as much as some other microphones. The PodMic USB, on the other hand, it's going to pick up a little more around. It's not going to isolate sound quite as much. And when it comes to handling noise, this is definitely not as good. Same with the original PodMic at rejecting handling noise. You can hear me just putting my hand on the microphone, adjusting the yoke of the microphone. It's picking up kind of, all of that stuff. Other microphones like the SM7B are way better at rejecting. Look at this. It's like I'm playing the drums on this microphone. If I try to do that here, you're going to want to turn off the video. I think it would take a toll on the quality of this video if I did not talk about the toll that this microphone takes on your wallet, because it is twice the price of the original PodMic. It's hard not to feel like this microphone is too expensive, and truth be told, I think that this microphone is too expensive. Now, I think it is possible to justify that price. The microphone does come with a windscreen. The original didn't, so instead of having to spend an extra $20, I can imagine a windscreen like this costing $20 to $30, so maybe that makes this a $170, $180 microphone that comes with a windscreen. It does add USB functionality. It does so in a really great way that then gives you access to all of Rode's DSP, all of that processing that you can do through your computer. So if you're somebody who's going to be using the microphone as a USB mic most of the time, and you're somebody who doesn't mind software processing where you're running everything through a computer, then that opens up a lot of possibilities just straight out of the box with the microphone. And when you look at something like the Shure MV7, which has an MSRP of $249, it does have a signal processing app, the Shure Motive app, which is sure awesome, but the Rode apps are way better. This has micro USB instead of USB-C, and that's kind of it, and it's $50 more. Okay, maybe then the PodMic USB is not sounding like such a bad deal, but it's impossible not to look at the $99 PodMic and go, why is this twice the price? If this mic didn't exist, if the original didn't exist and Rode just released this as a $200 microphone, maybe it would be easier to swallow. If this came in at $150, it would be a no-brainer. And it's like, okay, you're paying $50 more to get USB functionality and a windscreen. Maybe that's a little too inexpensive, so maybe $170, $180. It's hard not to look at that $200 price tag and think that the microphone is just a little bit too expensive. So the things to keep in mind when it comes to either PodMic, the USB, or the original is that they are solid microphones. They're relatively affordable, especially the original, and they're good mics to grow with. They are not the best sounding microphones out there. They're just not, but they are mics that can be EQ'd to sound really good. The USB has all kinds of really cool functionality in it, and a great thing with them is they're great mics to grow with. So what happened to me before I had this addiction where now I have like a million microphones, but what has also happened to a lot of other people I know is you start out with your $99 PodMic or maybe your $199 PodMic USB, and then as you start refining your tastes and your workflow, maybe you do want to upgrade to something that's a little more high-end. And then the PodMic can be your second microphone, your guest microphone, part of a second setup. So I know a lot of people that kind of went from being their main microphone to their secondary microphone. And that's great. Like you kind of won't outgrow the PodMic, even if it ends up not being your main microphone forever. But with all of the processing you can do with the PodMic USB, just plugged in directly to your computer, that does give you a lot of flexibility that then means maybe it could be a main microphone longer than the original could because XLR only, depending on the interface you run into. I feel like it was easier to start outgrowing this than it is with the PodMic USB. And thank you so much to everyone who helped support my channel through Patreon and YouTube channel memberships. I appreciate you so much. And if you want to hear how the PodMic USB compares to 25, maybe 26, I think it was, other really awesome microphones on both a male and a female voice, check out my super in-depth comparison video right here.